The Atman, its bondage and freedom. The third Jnana Yoga class for beginners, delivered at 228 West 39th Street, New York, on Wednesday evening, 8th January 1896, and recorded by Mr. Josiah J. Goodwin. We have talked of Nitya and Anitya and their Viveka, discriminating that which is real from that which is unreal. According to the Advaita philosophy, there is only one thing real in the universe, which it calls Brahman. Everything else is unreal, manifested and manufactured out of Brahman by the power of Maya. To reach back to that Brahman is our goal. We are, each one of us, that Brahman, that reality, plus this Maya. If we can get rid of this Maya or ignorance, then we become what we really are. According to this philosophy, each man consists of three parts: the body, the internal organ or the mind, and behind that, what is called the Atman, the self. The body is only the external coating and the mind is only the finer part of the body. But the Atman is the real perceiver, the real enjoyer, the being in the body who is working the body by means of the internal organ or the mind. The Atman is without beginning and without end. It is the only existence in the human body which is immaterial. Because it is immaterial, it cannot be a compound. And because it is not a compound, it does not obey the law of cause and effect. And so it is immortal. That which is immortal can have no beginning, because everything with a beginning must have an end. It also follows that it must be formless. There cannot be any form without matter. Everything that has form must have a beginning and an end. We have none of us seen a form which had not a beginning and will not have an end. A form comes out of a combination of force and matter. This chair has a peculiar form, that is to say, a certain quantity of matter is acted upon by a certain amount of force and made to assume a particular shape. The shape is, therefore, the result of a combination of matter and force. No combination can be eternal. There must come to every combination a time when it will dissolve. So, all forms have a beginning and an end and are perishing, just as we see with our bodies. We know our body will perish. It had a beginning and it will have an end. So with everything that we can conceive of as having a form, it must have a beginning and an end, birth and death. But the self, having no form, cannot be bound by the law of beginning and end. It is existing from infinite time. Just as time is infinite and space is infinite, so is the self of man infinite. Secondly, being infinite, it must be all-pervading. It is only form that is conditioned and limited by space. That which is formless cannot be confined in space. So according to Advaita Vedanta, the self, the Atman in you, in me, in everyone, is omnipresent. You are as much in the sun now as in this earth, as much in England as in America. But the self, while embodied, acts through the mind and the body. And where they are, there its action is visible. Death means the dissolution of the body. The body will be broken to pieces, dissolved. What remains are the samskaras, the sum total of the actions. Each work we do, each thought we think produces an impression called in Sanskrit samskara upon the mind. And the sum total of these impressions becomes the tremendous force which is called character. The character of a man is what he has created himself. It is the result of the sum total of the mental and physical actions that he has done in his life. The sum total of the samskaras is the force which gives us the next direction after death. A man dies. What becomes of the body? It falls away and goes back to the elements. His brain goes, his nervous system, and everything goes. And only the samskaras remain, the sum total of the forces that have been acting upon him. Why doesn't the mind dissolve? Because the finer the material, the more persistent it is. But the mind also dissolves in the long run, and that is what we are struggling for. But it doesn't dissolve as easily as the body. Being very fine, it is very persistent. In this connection, the best illustration that comes to my mind is that of the whirlwind. Different currents of air coming from different directions meet, and at the meeting point become united and go on rotating. As they rotate, they form a body of dust, drawing in bits of paper, straw, and so forth to drop them at one place, only to go on to another and so to go on rotating, raising and forming bodies out of the materials which are before them. Even so do the forces called pranas in Sanskrit come together and form this gyrating motion. And when the body falls down, a little bit of dust is gathered up and made into a new body and moves forward. And when this falls, another rises, and so on. It goes on from one spot, one life, to another, until when it goes down and dies, most of the dust drops, only a little remains. Force cannot travel without matter, so when the body falls down, the mind stuff remains, prana, in the form of samskaras acting on it. Then it goes on to another point, raises up another whirl from fresh materials, and begins another gyrating motion. And so it travels from place to place until the force is all spent. Then it falls down, ended. So when the mind will end, be broken to pieces entirely without leaving any samskara, we shall be entirely free. And until that time, we are in bondage. Until then, the Atman is covered by the whirlwind of the mind and imagines it is being taken from place to place. When the whirlwind falls down, the Atman finds that it is all-pervading. It can go where it likes, is entirely free, and is able to manufacture any number of minds or bodies it likes. This freedom is the goal towards which we are all moving. Suppose there is a ball in this room, and we each have a mallet in our hands and begin to strike the ball, giving it hundreds of blows, driving it from point to point until at last it flies out of the room. With what force and in what direction will it go out? These will be determined by the forces that have been acting upon it all through the room, what in dynamics is called the resultant. All the different blows that have been given will remain, and with their resultant, it will fly. Each one of our actions, mental and physical, is such a blow. The human mind is a ball which is being hit. We are being hit about this room of the world all the time. And when we leave the world, the resultant force of all these blows propels us. So we see that no two balls can have the same speed or direction when they come out of the room. In each case, the speed and direction of the motion will be determined by the hits it has received. So all our actions in this world determine when we can leave it, and our future birth is determined by all of them. This is one case. Suppose I give you an endless chain in which there is a black link and a white link alternately, without beginning and without end. And suppose I ask you the nature of the chain. At first you will find a difficulty in determining its nature, the chain being infinite at both ends. But slowly you find out it is a chain. You soon discover that this infinite chain is a repetition of these two links, black and white, and these multiplied infinitely become a whole chain. If you know the nature of these two links, you know the nature of the whole chain, because it is a perfect repetition. All our lives, past, present, and future, form, as it were, an infinite chain without beginning and without end, each section of which is one life, with two ends, two links, birth and death. What we are and what we do here is being repeated again and again, with but little variation. So if we know these two links, this little passage in this world, we shall know all the passages we shall have to pass through. We see therefore that our passage into this world has been exactly determined by our previous passages. Similarly, we are in this world by our own actions. Just as we go out with the sum total of our present actions upon us, so we see that we come into it with the sum total of our past actions upon us. That which takes us out is the very same thing that brings us in. What brings us in? Our past deeds. What takes us out? Our own deeds here. And so on and on we go. Like the caterpillar that takes the thread from its own mouth and builds its cocoon, and at last finds itself bound inside the cocoon, we have bound ourselves by our own actions. We have thrown the network of our actions around ourselves. We have set the law of causation in motion, and we find it hard to get ourselves out of it. We have set the wheel in motion, and we are being crushed under it. So this philosophy teaches us that we are uniformly being bound by our own actions, good or bad. The next point to understand is where the soul goes and where it comes from. I have been telling you that the soul comes and goes, but I will explain these terms afterwards. It is just as in studying astronomy. You are first told that the sun is moving round the earth, and the calculations are made accordingly. But as soon as you graduate to finer calculations, you are told that it is actually the earth that goes around the sun. So for the present, we will say that the Atman is moving towards salvation and is being born and dies. Later on, we will find that the Atman never comes nor goes, is never born nor dies. It is nature that moves before the Atman. This motion is reflected on the Atman, and the Atman ignorantly thinks it is moving, not nature. When the Atman thinks that, it is in bondage. But when it comes to find that it never moves, that it is omnipresent, then freedom comes. We are studying the first part of this philosophy, and we will keep to its terminology. So the Atman through these actions comes to higher and lower states. This is the celebrated theory of reincarnation, and this theory, this law, binds all creation. People in this country think it horrible that man should come up from an animal. Why? What will be the end of these millions of animals? Are they nothing? If we have a soul, so have they. And if they have none, neither have we. It is silly nonsense to say that man alone has a soul and the animals none. The same argument would apply to all. I have seen many men worse than animals. It is all a continuous series. The human soul has manifested itself through lower and higher forms, migrating from one to another according to the samskaras or impressions. But it is only in the highest form as man that it attains to liberty. The man form is higher than even the angel forms. Of all forms, it is the highest. Man is the highest being in creation because he attains to liberty. Man becomes free. Any force projected from a point goes on and on till it becomes a circle, and then goes back to the point from which it was projected. You are aware of electricity, how it comes from the dynamo and returns to the dynamo from which it started. So the tendency is with all forces. There is no movement in a straight line. All infinite movements are in circles. And the struggle in this universe is to complete the circle. All this universe was in Brahman. And it was as it were projected out of him. And being projected out, it has moved forward, evolved. But what is meant by that forward movement? At last we find the universe was moving in a circle and comes back to the point from which it was projected. So with this force which we call soul, which for the time being we will assume is a force projected out from God. Later on we will find what it really is. This being projected, it evolved through all sorts of vegetable and animal forms, and at last it is in man. Man is the farthest curve of the circle, the nearest link to God. To come back to this point from which we have been projected is the great struggle of life. Whether people know it or not does not matter. But whatever you see in this universe of motion, of struggles, in plant or in minerals or anything, is a tendency to come back to the center and be at rest. There was a tremendous equilibrium, as it were, that has been destroyed. And all atoms and molecules and parts are struggling to find that equilibrium again. And in the struggle they are combining and reforming and forming again all this wonderful panorama of nature to get back to that equilibrium again. So all social struggles, wars and fights, human struggles and competitions in plant life, animal life and everywhere are but expressions of that eternal struggle to get back to this equilibrium. The next question is, what reincarnates? We have just said that it is the mind and not the Atman, because the Atman is omnipresent. The Atman, when in ignorance and bondage, can only act through our mind, and in that mind are all the occasions of birth and death. Going from birth to death, this travelling is what is called samsara in Sanskrit. Literally, the round of birth and death. All creation passing through this round will sooner or later become free. The question may be raised that if we all shall come to freedom, why should we struggle to attain it? If everyone is going to be free, we will sit down and wait. It is true that every being will become free sooner or later. No one can be lost. Suppose a stone falls through space. It falls down and down. But you know mathematically that there must be a point when it will take an upward curve. Nothing can come to destruction. Everything must come up. If that is so, what is the use of our struggling? We may sit here because eventually we will be taken upward again. In the first place, these struggles are the very factors that will bring us to the center. And in the second place, we do not know why we struggle. We have to. Of thousands of men, some are awakened to the idea that they will become free. The vast mass of mankind are content with material things. But there are some who awake and want to get back who have had enough of this playing down here. These struggle consciously, while the rest do it unconsciously. Along with this comes a very important question. And because I may forget it, I will discuss it now. The question is, why should we attempt to get out of the world and back to the center? Suppose we have all come from God, but we find this world is pleasurable and nice. We would rather try to enjoy more of it. Why should we try to get out of it? The alpha and omega of Vedanta philosophy is to give up the world. That is the idea with which we started, giving up the unreal and taking the real. But why should we not turn toward enjoyment rather than away from it? People may say, look at the wonderful improvements going on in the world every day. How much luxury is being manufactured for it? This is very enjoyable. Why should we turn away and strive for something else? The answer is this, that all the forms which we are seeing now have been manifested again and again, and the world in which we live has been here many times before. I have been here and talked to you many times before. You will know that it must be so, and the very words that you have been listening to now, you have heard many times before. And many times more it will be the same. Souls were never different. These minds and bodies and words are constantly recurring and dissolving and recurring. This world has been here many times. We are all certain that this world will die, broken to pieces. Secondly, we see that these things periodically occur. Suppose here are 3 or 4 dice, and when we throw them, one comes up 5, another 4, another 3, and another 2. If you keep on throwing, there must come times when those very same numbers will recur. Go on throwing, and no matter how long may be the interval, those numbers must come again. It can be mathematically asserted in how many throws they will come again. This is the law of chance. So with souls and their associations. However distant may be the periods, the same combinations and dissolutions will happen again and again. There is only a short rest, and then the same birth, eating and drinking, and then death come round again and again. Some never find anything higher than the enjoyments of the world. But those who want to soar higher find that these enjoyments are never final, are only on the way. Many times I have had these enjoyments. Along with this matter of throwing dice comes a very interesting question, that it is not the same soul that has these same experiences time after time. This body is one link in the whole chain of samsara, and the chain is composed of many links, each link a form, let us say, beginning from the little worm and ending in man. These links form a circle, and this circle is revolving like the Ferris wheel at Chicago, the carriages of which are in motion all the time, but the occupants are changing. A man enters a carriage, goes through the circle, and comes out again. The wheel still goes round and round. This soul which is now in us goes out. All these forms are permanent cyclically. They revolve, showing all these forms, but you and I must get out. Different souls are riding in this wheel. This is how it can be explained that a man can read the past and future life of another man. Some of you perhaps have seen how the past and the future can be read. How can one read the past and future? Here we get the explanation. The most astonishing powers of reading the past and the future have been known in every country and every age. As soon as you enter the Ferris wheel, it can be written down precisely where you will go. But when you come out, no more can be said. But once you are in, you are bound, and everything goes according to the law, and where you will go can be predicted. As soon as you enter the carriage, you are no more free. Freedom of the will is a contradiction of terms. When you enter the carriage, you become or manifest as a will, whereas before that you are not a will. When you are in the carriage, the will must move with the wheel. This shows us how different motives are acting upon us. When I am hungry, I desire food. That desire comes when I am hungry and not before or after. And when I am stuffed with food, I do not care for the most dainty dishes before me. That hatred for food comes when I am full. So all these wills and desires that we see in our lives have a motive power behind them. That which has become the will is free. But the will is not free. When it degenerates into will, it becomes bound. When you enter into one of the carriages of the Ferris wheel, you are bound by the conditions of the wheel. But when you come out, you are free. So whosoever has come into this wheel of nature, for him to talk of freedom is nonsense. It cannot be. The law of causation rules us. And when we see that it is the law of causation, what can we do? Why preach religion and why struggle to do something higher and all that? That may be a natural question, but it is wrong. Because it takes for granted that one being is bound by law and another is not. If you say, "Why do you preach religion to us?" I answer, because I too am bound by laws and have to work under laws, as I am doing. The relation does not change if we are all in the same situation. We are all in this room. My distance from you is about 4 feet. If this room moves, the distance between us would not change. That is to say, we are both changed, but the relation does not change. So there will still be 4 feet between us. If we are all bound, the relation will not change. A thief is brought before a magistrate, and the thief says, "Why should you punish me? It was by the laws of nature that I was forced to steal. It was not I." The magistrate replies, "The same laws of nature compel me to punish you, my friend." What is the motive power of all our actions? Desire, thirst. We desire, we want something, and we are struggling to fulfill that want. So long as there is desire or want, it is a sure sign that there is imperfection. A perfect, free being cannot have any desire. God cannot want anything. If he desires, he cannot be God. He will be imperfect. So all the talk about God desiring this and that and becoming angry and pleased is baby's talk, but means nothing. Neither shall we desire when we are perfect, for the very fact of desiring shows imperfection. Therefore it has been taught by all teachers, desire nothing, give up all desires and be perfectly satisfied. What shall you desire? Here again I must give you a little warning. The two extremes generally appear to be alike, but one is as different from the other as the difference between the poles. One is the North Pole and the other is the South Pole. A child comes into the world crawling and without teeth, and the old man gets out without teeth and crawling. The extremes are alike, but the one has no experience of this life while the other has the experience of a lifetime. When the vibrations of light are very low, we do not see them. It is darkness. When very high, the result is also darkness. But one is much intenser than the other, although apparently the same. So the extremes generally appear to be the same, though one is as distant from the other as the poles. The wall has no desires, so neither has the perfect man. But the wall is not sentient enough to desire. It is a lump of clay. There are idiots who have no desires in this world because their brain is imperfect. At the same time, the highest state is when we have no desires. But the two are opposite poles of the same existence. One is near the animal and the other is God. We must take care not to mix up the two poles of existence.